Hello, all you textual deviants, and welcome to another episode of Texting. I'm Mark Will in Taipei.
Assalamu alaikum, Ismi Shafshufa in St. Petersburg.
All right, this is season 3, episode 11. We're calling it We Are All Pirates. And that phrase is taken from Muammar Gaddafi's 64th UN General Assembly speech from 2009. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Here's the man himself, Muammar Gaddafi.
Handsome.
Okay. This is a picture of him in younger days, when he was the colonel, I guess, a military guy who led a coup, orchestrated a coup in '69. But we think he was born around 1942. I think the birth records were not that precise, but we certainly know when he was killed, when he met his demise. That would be the year 2011.
Live streamed.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to that in a second. But from 1979 to 2011, his title was Brotherly Leader and Guide of the Revolution of the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, which is a pretty grandiose title to give oneself. But yeah, we know the date of his demise because this cackling queen of chaos said, "We came, we saw, he died." We're talking about HRC, of course, Hillary Rodham Clinton, who delighted in his assassination and sodomy. He was sodomized with the bayonet, we are told. And that was the doing of the U.S. State Department and, Black Ops.
I think we need to.
Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I just don't know how long I can bear to look at her mean. So,
Fair enough.
no,
Yes.
it's one of those statements that maybe before you are cognizant of just how despicable American foreign policy is, you kind of let slide. You just assume, oh, they do tend to make some of these statements, but ultimately he was an evil dictator, so we'll kind of give her the pass. Like, of course, John McCain comes to mind with his bomb, 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 Iran. So, but once you are outside of the American media bubble, you realize just quotes like this, just you perceive them in a different light, and they appear for what they really are, which is just shockingly abhorrent.
And the fact that she would say that publicly, I mean, she was in an interview with Leslie Stahl, but the cameras were rolling, and the fact that she would say that and laugh as though it's perfectly normal and proper and acceptable is just astonishing and grotesque and
Exactly.
vile. Yeah. But interestingly, yeah, the date of that is 2011, just 2 short years after he made this speech that we're going to look at today. Now, of course, the speech was delivered in
I'm still going to
Arabic.
double down on my request to move away from Hillary's picture, please.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Is there any way we can do that?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
yeah. So, before we get to the next slide, let's just say the speech that we're considering was delivered in Arabic, Libyan Arabic, I guess. Um, and of course, I'm not an Arabic speaker, so we, I think you too relied on a translator. I only watched a few minutes of the video. I think you watched the entire thing. I read it. I read the
I
English
did, but I
translation.
mean, I was just reading. I had my eyes on the document, so I was just relying on it for audio, really. From time to time, I would
Okay.
switch back to the video. The most interesting parts of the video were when they would pan to different delegates in the assembly itself. The quality of the
Uh
video was
huh.
so poor that it was kind of hard to make out what the reaction was, but it seemed like various members were, I would describe it as bemused as the overwhelming. But
Like it's a joke or something, or they don't
yeah,
take it seriously.
like I guess so. Like this guy, is that so? Are you surprised that that's the reaction?
No, not at all. That's what I would expect. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. I mean, you could argue that some people might be moved by what he was saying, some, especially some in the quote unquote third world, but
Yeah.
it's hard to
Well,
say.
I'm sure many were, but those that got camera time were probably derisive and mocking. Um, but I don't know. I didn't watch the video.
Yeah.
Um, the English translation of the speech, though, is fascinating, and there. I assume it's a solid translation, but it seems like rhetorically he rambles and rants at times, and there's a lot of repetition, and um, he returns to certain themes, but overall, it reads to me as a very powerful speech and a very strong indictment of uh, the superpowers,
Mm.
um, as he calls them. But
Mm.
before we get into that little bit more background, we're looking at a slide now of the so-called Green Book, and I mention this because it's the publication of his political philosophy. I haven't read it, but just as Chairman Mao had his little red book, Gaddafi had the Green Book, and as we'll find out later, there was apparently a white book as well. But
Mm-hmm.
the Green Book is the equivalent to Mao's little red book. I'm not sure what's in it. I read a few of the most famous quotes. It said something about girls and women should be educated just like boys and men. So there was, I think, education was an important policy of his, and
And literacy rates
you know,
skyrocketed during his
yes,
rule.
yeah, yeah, and the wealth. I think they were the wealthiest African nation or one of
Yes,
them.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and of course, after he was overthrown in that coup overseen by the Queen of Chaos and Obama too. Let's not forget his involvement. It was on his watch. He was the actual president.
Africa's son.
Um, yeah, exactly, as he's
We'll get into
called
that later. Yeah.
by Gaddafi himself, right? But you know, um, now allegedly there are open slave markets, and the terrorists have taken over. I don't know if things have stabilized since 2011, but it was a disaster, and it led to a flood of migrants in Europe, predictably, right? Um
They certainly haven't stabilized. I mean, today there are two active governments,
mhm
one of which is recognized by most of the West, and the other, which is in the East, is more Kremlin favored. So you've got just another theater of war for Russia and NATO
So
to duke
yeah,
it out,
so
and it's
once
absolute
again,
chaos,
once
as you
again,
said.
well done, U.S. Well done. Yeah.
I want to say a couple things just about the video.
Mm-hmm.
First, I'm kind of surprised that that's the best quality that's available, and I'm wondering if that's because it was intentionally sort of
I think
swept from
so.
the records.
I think so. I had trouble finding a video version, and in fact, I had trouble finding the text. Like the only complete translation I found was at this obscure site called AfricanNews.com. I'll include a link to that. I mean,
I
it's
think
a
it's a decent
good.
website, to be fair. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
found a bunch of
I
stuff
mean,
there.
I just had never heard of it.
Sure, I
Maybe
get you.
maybe
I get
it's
you.
maybe it's quite. I mean, I didn't say it was a shitty website, did I? I
No,
said it
no,
was
no. You
obscure,
said
right? I
obscure.
just
I'm just saying I don't know
yeah,
if it's
I
obscure.
just yeah, okay. Maybe there are a lot of visitors, um, interested in African news, so I shouldn't say it's obscure, but I had never heard of it, right? Like, why can't you find it? Why
Sure,
can't you find that speech, on Western websites or on the Guardian? Well, we know
or Al
why. We know
Jazeera at the
why.
least.
Al Jazeera, even, yeah. So, and maybe it is there somewhere, but it didn't come up when I searched. Probably Google deranks those search options, right? We know how they do that. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if YouTube suppressed certain videos or required sign-ins saying that they promote terrorism or something. So yeah,
And I wondered
I
also just quickly
go
as a
ahead.
note about the translation. I wondered if that English translation that we're hearing is live translating, or if someone went back and
Right?
did that. If it's
Did it?
live, it's
Did it?
impressive.
Yeah. Well, but probably there was rehearsal, right? Like the interpreter had read the speech, they practiced a few times before it was delivered. Although, at times some of the remarks seem almost impromptu and off the cuff, but um
Exactly. I mean, do you really think that the speech was that pre-prepared?
I don't know. I mean, if not, then it's a really impressive piece of rhetoric. I did
Yeah,
see a picture of him with some handwritten notes, like on yellow legal paper. It looked like, and a lot of crossouts. So maybe he was revising up to the last minute. They say that Clinton did that. Like he would rehearse his speech and keep editing and making modifications up until delivery. So yeah, I mean, the interpretation job was very well done.
yeah, and
Did
I'm pretty
it
sure it
did it
was
seem to
live.
correspond with the text? You read the
Yeah, I mean,
African
it
news
was
text as well,
identical
right?
essentially.
Okay.
Yeah,
So yeah, it was just a transcript of whatever the interpreter translated.
yeah,
Um yeah, okay. Well, let's get into that after we mention one more bit of background information. This was something I discovered, and it was news to me. I don't know if
Oh,
you had heard
really?
of it, but
This is one of the few things I did associate with Gaddafi is like
okay.
his
Well,
guard of
yeah,
virgins. But I'll let you.
yeah. Well, the famous Amazonian guard, right? Like he had a a, a troop of female bodyguards, which you know were noted for their beauty and their purity, although, of course, there are allegations of sexual harassment and even rape. But when we consider the source of that information, we have to wonder, right? Like, if Wikipedia says it or some Western source, it's like there's no reason to assume it's true. Doesn't mean it's not true, but to uncritically accept that as fact is
That's right. I agree with
probably
you
not
completely.
wise. Probably not wise. But I mean, it's a it's a really interesting spectacle, right? The Amazonian Guard, like
Yeah, and I think
warrior
it'd be fairly
princesses.
yeah, I think it'd be fairly uncontroversial to say that he was an eccentric in certain ways, right? So he did dress quite flamboyantly. Um, yeah, I heard he had an affection for flamenco music, and that he actually learned Spanish so that he could get deeper into his passion for flamenco. He grew up in the Italian part of Libya, so perhaps some of his penchants for European culture stemmed from that. And also, coming back to the Green Book, I know that a lot of his ideas did directly challenge certain traditional Quranic teachings. So
Mm.
he wasn't fully embraced by the Arab world because of some of his maybe more quote unquote progressive views, perhaps relating to education, as you said. Oh, and also his general sympathies for socialism and communism, some of which, again, didn't jibe. So that could be one of the reasons why he ended up having to become this kind of figurehead for Africa rather than the pan Arab states. Although, in my opinion, this stuff usually comes down to profit interests more so than ideology, but it's hard to say.
Well, and he also wasn't fully embraced by the communist or socialist world either, right? Like, I mean, he espoused some socialist ideals, but his Libyan form of socialism was kind of a mix of traditional Muslim and maybe even traditional tribal Libyan uh, culture and philosophy, and you know, socialist political ideology. Is that fair to say?
I'm not sure, but
Let's assume
I'll
that it
buy it.
is.
Okay.
Yeah, let's assume that it is. And if not, then someone out there can correct us. We don't pretend to be experts. We're just investigating this fascinating text. And I think we can all agree that the Amazonian Guard is quite an impressive institution. If there are girls in it, you know I'm down for it.
My lips are sealed.
I knew you were going to say it, so I saved you the trouble.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
All right. So he begins the speech um, by referring to himself as the president of the African Union, which I don't know much about, but I assume that's true. He is the president, or was the president of the African Union at the time of this speech. Does that mean anything to you? Like, what exactly did that involve?
I'm not sure. As I referenced earlier, he did turn his attention to Africa, and he was always seeking to provide some kind of contrast to the West in terms of power, like we're seeing today with the whole multi hegemonic or multipolar, sorry, an effort to make the world more multipolar. I know that many Africans credit him with promoting like internet throughout the continent and credit him for pushing that forward. Um, so I think, yeah, he's generally respected on the continent, but obviously with lots of caveats, and the main caveat being that I'm not an expert.
Right. Neither am I. as you were saying that, I thought of a little personal anecdote. When did I first in my life hear about Gaddafi? I remember very clearly. I was in church with my father, and the minister, the preacher, asked the congregation to write down the name of someone that they hate. And I think, the sermon was on forgiveness and
You hope so.
loving one's enemies. Yeah, it would be interesting if the preacher encouraged people to hate their enemies. But yeah, the Christian lesson of that particular Sunday was something to do with forgiveness. And so um, I saw that my father wrote down the name Gaddafi with a Q, which
Wow.
is how they were spelling it at that time. And I was like, does he know this person? And I had to ask him who he was. Like, who's that? Is this someone in our neighborhood? What did he do to you? And he just said that he was the most evil man in the world or something to that extent,
Holy shit.
something to that effect. And you know, I don't know if he stooped to praying for him, but
That's crazy.
yeah, it's strange, isn't it? That's who you would think of, like someone you don't even know. But
Yeah,
I guess
exactly. I
I
mean, that's
could,
just so Orwellian, like 2 minute hate type stuff, Like
yeah,
this
absolutely.
this picture has
Well,
been presented in such a repeated fashion that they just
yeah,
get you. Yeah. I wanted to just
such
say,
is the power, such was and is the power of mainstream media.
frothing at the mouth. That's what I wanted to say. But yeah, I was thinking. I like to create my little nicknames for each episode. Today, my nickname is Chef Shufa. So since you haven't asked me about it, I will tell you that it means the messy-haired one, and
Ah,
it's also not a particularly flattering nickname, but it is more so than the one by which he's more known in the West, which was the one that Reagan dubbed him, the Mad Dog of the Middle East. And I felt like
oh
that would be
my.
like pandering a little bit too much. So this one is a bit of like a happy medium. But
Okay, I'm
yeah,
glad you explained that. I should have asked at the beginning.
it sounds like
That's
shakshuka,
negligent of
that
me.
that Arabic
That's
breakfast. You know that?
yeah, yes, I do. Yeah, it does sound like that. Maybe that's why
Yeah,
I didn't ask. I thought you were hungry or something. But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, you mentioned Reagan, and he actually mentions Reagan in this speech. He says something about poisoned roses sent to Libyan children. I didn't look
yeah.
that up, but
I tried following it up.
certainly
I couldn't
wouldn't
find anything.
surprise me. But this would have been in the Reagan era. Like it was probably around 1980 when this happened at the First Presbyterian Church. You know,
Ah, okay,
and
okay.
so it would have been soon after he had declared himself the brotherly leader or whatever, right? And so I'm sure that was like all over the news. Look at this mad dog of the Middle East.
Yeah.
He needs to be taken out. He's destroying freedom.
Well, again, I
So,
would like a higher level of expertise to add comment, but apparently he did. He was behind. They credited him with funding every kind of revolutionary and the fine line between revolutionary and terrorist group active, including like IRA, I think, um, different flights that went down, different planes that went down. He was blamed for. So I don't know all the
yeah.
details, but he definitely was like spreading his influence. How much of that was positive and how much was destructive? I would hope more on the positive, but I would have to like obviously look at each of those
And
instances.
and how much was true. I mean,
Yeah,
at that time, I probably would have just nodded my head and said, "Yeah, he's a bad guy." Now,
he's a bad
I'm,
dude.
yeah, he tried to kill my daddy.
Exactly.
So, you know, knowing what we know now, there's no way, I don't think either of us would accept any kind of report in the Western media at face value, right? Like we would demand evidence, and we would remain skeptical even when so-called evidence is presented, because it's very often a psyop.
In the
That's
words
just the way
of
it is, people.
Donald Trump, a lot of killers. We have a lot of killers. What, you think our country is so innocent? Sorry.
Yeah, good
Donald
point.
Trump's most redeeming moment.
A broken clock is right 2 times a day. All right, so he, interestingly, I'm just moving along here, not trying
Sure.
to step on your
More
Trump joke.
seamlessly than in our Proof Rock episode, I will say. I
Okay,
appreciate that.
well, we're progressing. Um, yeah, it's interesting that he addresses our son Obama, as you alluded to before, and in 2009 he was saying it marks the beginning of a change. We would be content if Obama could remain president of the United States forever. By 2011, I doubt he still felt that way, right? After he knew that Obama's State Department, with the cooperation of, intelligence forces and moderate rebels, were overthrowing his government and ultimately aiming to assassinate him, which they
Yeah, I wondered
succeeded
when he
in
was
doing.
being so effusively praising, I wondered how much of that was some sort of like rhetorical tactic, like setting up the inevitable fall, because it just didn't seem like he would be so naive to really believe that this like messianic figure had landed in American politics.
Well,
I mean,
many
I
of
know
us
we all
were.
kind of fell for it to some extent, but still,
Exactly.
he's coming from the apparatus. I mean, it.
But I
Anyway,
think, like many people, remember, this war criminal won the peace prize because he wasn't George W. Bush, right? And so
sure.
Gaddafi, it's after 8 years of Bush, so Gaddafi thinks, oh, they elected a young black man of African descent, so he's our son. And he actually, I read this somewhere back in the day. He had a very strong attraction to Condoleezza Rice. He called her his African princess or something like that. So
Yeah, I saw this. I saw this.
I think he hoped for some kind of connection with her, and he probably, naively, we can say in retrospect, hoped for something like that with Obama too. Like, and as I say, we all, to some extent, were duped. Some of us more so than others. I mean, by the time he was elected, um, and certainly by the time he was president, it was obvious to me that he was a fucking fraud. But around 2007, um, because he delivered that speech against the Iraq War, right? So that was
And
his
he made some
moment.
impressive rhetorical advancements addressing. I remember he addressed the Arab world with a lot of more reconciliatory language, and it was definitely coming off impressively rhetorically. I'm just saying, someone with Gaddafi's political acumen, you would assume
Should have
it
known
wouldn't.
better.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think he was just hoping against hope, or, like you say, maybe it was just a rhetorical ploy. But I think it's still early enough that you know maybe he still hoped for the best. And he, apparently, Obama delivered a speech about nuclear non-proliferation, so
That's
maybe
right. Yeah.
that was encouraging. Maybe he thought, okay, this guy at least knows what's up, so let's encourage him in this direction, maybe kind of guide and shape him.
It's also
Let
maybe
him
worth
know that.
noting that
I was just going to
he
say, let him
go on.
know
Sorry.
that we're not like his enemy. We're willing to work with him. Just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a lot of this reminded me of the Putin emergency episode that we did. Right, like Putin tries to play fair with Bush and other administrations, Clinton, only to be rebuffed and insulted and
right,
shut out.
right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that
So
consistently is part of Putin's speeches. Like even today, like every week, it's always like we're ready to talk to the West. We don't want to be your enemies. As soon as you show us that you're willing to treat us, more civilly or whatever. But anyway, I just wanted to say Obama apparently in a in one of his interviews after serving said that post Gaddafi Libya, that's like his biggest regret or failure, or his administration's. So I don't know if we want to give him any credit for that, or if he just kind of realizes how the egg was on his face for what ended up happening. But it could. I don't. So I guess my question there is like, did it go to plan, or was there no plan, or was the plan? Yeah,
well, the buck stops with him, so fuck that. He's responsible. However, I think,
sure. I'm just saying he's seeing that as like a kind of mistake. That's my point.
yeah, well, that, in retrospect, thanks a lot. Like, why didn't you stop it at the time? It's like, people now saying, oh, maybe it wasn't a good idea to force people to take the jab. Like, where were you at the time when it mattered? Um, so, okay, yeah, at least he recognizes that. Does HRC admit what a disastrous policy it was? Probably not. She's probably still proud of it and, you know, highlighting that on her resume. Um, and
She's
I
too
was just going
focused
to
on
say, like,
criticizing pro-Palestine students right now.
yeah, right. I'm sure she would tie them to Gaddafi somehow and
Yeah,
say, we had to do it. So, if we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, which I don't think we should do, we could say that was Hillary's baby. She ran the show, and it was her disaster. But, he's the president, right? Like, you got to be responsible
yeah.
for the idiots, for what the idiots you hire do.
Which is not to say that obviously Gaddafi was universally loved by Libyan people, or that he was a good leader. I wouldn't. These are all questions for me, and I'm sure that there was significant opposition to his rule. But what
Yeah.
came afterwards, just like in Iraq, like I don't think it's. I don't think anyone could argue like it was worth it without a much better plan, right?
You sound like a Gaddafi apologist.
Yeah,
You
exactly,
love you love Saddam and Assad and Gaddafi, don't you?
exactly.
All right. So, um, he in the we're still like in the introductory section of the speech. He says, we should be focused on our what he calls our principal common enemy, and then he lists quite a few things: climate change, capitalist economic decline, food and water crises, desertification, terrorism, immigration, piracy, man-made and natural epidemics, and nuclear proliferation. And that's where he gave Obama some credit. So he kind of extends the olive branch, says, I want to work with the West and the superpowers and so on, before he gets into his criticisms which, of course, are the
Yeah.
more interesting parts of the speech.
And interestingly also is that he points out that his relationship with Berlusconi, of all people, like, was actually quite a positive and productive one. So he he uses that as like an example of this, of being able to work, and kind of excludes Berlusconi and Italy in general for some of the other criticisms, scathing criticisms he has of the superpowers. I thought that was
Well,
interesting.
that's because Italy paid reparations. Basically, there was financial restitution, which I didn't know about, but according to the speech, Italy compensated Libya for colonizing it, which is amazing. I didn't know that happened. We'll
I
get
guess I'm
into
more
that more
cynical and
later.
just think, was that number appropriate? Was it a number, like the amount that they were giving? Was it in any way like compatible? And was Gaddafi personally taking a lot of that, and that's why he kind of wanted to stay
Right,
polite about that? So
right. You
yeah, I
always
just can't
wonder
help
about
but not
that.
think, I don't see it really being this like great act of humanitarian gesture. Maybe it was also associated with Gaddafi agreeing to keep the migrants away from Italy. So I'm just saying there could be more pernicious
Sure,
motives behind that
there
whole
was probably
partnership.
some tit for tat, but the fact that they acknowledged the colonization was
Mm.
wrong or
Yeah,
immoral and
yeah,
then paid reparations.
yeah.
I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. It's reparations. Anyway, he mentions these man-made epidemics, which is interesting because he says perhaps influenza H1N1, this was the time of swine flu, was a virus created in a laboratory that got out of control, originally being meant as a military weapon. And then later in the speech, he says, perhaps tomorrow there will be fish flu. He says capitalist companies produce viruses so that they can generate and sell vaccinations. And I'm going to just let those quotes hang in the air as viewers look at pictures of a pig, a fish, and a bat. Anything you want to say about that? I mean, you yesterday in one of your texts to me, you said that he was remarkably prescient about something or other. I think there are many instances of that, and
Yeah,
here's another one. Here's another one.
yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to see how many voices were making similar statements at the time. So I don't know if he was just kind of latching on to a common criticism, but certainly I would say he was bang on with this stuff, with this
Mm-hmm.
particular argument.
Yeah. All right, and then he gets into, well, he this is still him providing historical background. He says, as is known, the United Nations was founded by 3 or 4 countries against Germany at the time, right after World War II. Those countries formed a body called the Security Council. And the 3 or 4 countries are, of course, the US, the UK, Russia, and France. Later, as he explains, China became a a permanent member of the Security Council, but that apparently was by um, a vote in the General
Right.
Assembly. So
Mm-hmm.
according to him, China, it was agreed that China would join, but the other 4 just basically named themselves the Security Council. And then this is your slide. I'll let you read that. This is a great line.
Yeah, he goes on to say it should be called not the Security Council, but the Terror Council, and that's in a larger context of speaking about the times that the Security Council does decide to act and the times that it doesn't, and most notably being never really questioning their own actions, or of that, which are often imperialistic in nature. and failing to stop many wars, which I know you'll get into later, if it doesn't suit their agenda. And I would just add that if we could reduce this huge sprawling speech to 2 or 3 main theses, this seems to be an issue that he definitely focuses in on. I mean, this idea of wanting to not even necessarily get rid of the Security Council, but at least just make it the body that implements what the General Assembly decides and nothing else. So
Yeah.
it wants it. Yeah. So yeah,
Well,
you can go on from that.
he's calling out the two-tiered system that was pointed out by some of our listeners when we did the season 2 episode on the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which we'll also get to. I mean, it's just it all sounds nice in theory, but as you point out, I'll
These
let you
powers
read
never
this one.
use any resolutions against themselves. And that's another quote from Gaddafi. But just yesterday, Lindsey Graham's reaction to the ICJ's demand that Israel halt its invasion of Rafah. Lindsey Graham not only said that the ICC, I guess I should say, that the ICC can go to hell, but he also warned that if they dare to convict Israel, they could even possibly indict the great United States of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Do it. You should be one of those in the dock, Lindsay. You fake tough guy.
He's one of the most despicable people in politics, I think.
I mean, of course, I'm sure you saw that he was recently. He didn't say it explicitly, but he was basically saying that Israel had the right to nuke Gaza, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he said, "Well, we did it to the Japanese and it's a damn good thing we did. We needed to. So Israel should do whatever it needs to do." I mean, imagine Israel nuking Gaza. They'd basically be shooting themselves in the dick, wouldn't they?
Yeah. So can we just
You
really
yeah.
quickly maybe I don't know if you're an expert on this, but obviously there've been 2 judicial bodies in the last month making waves in the news. So we've got the ICC and the ICJ, right?
Yes.
And it sounds to me like yesterday's ruling was from the ICC. Is that right?
Okay. I don't know.
I know one of them is connected directly to The Hague and to the UN, and I believe that's the one that made this ruling yesterday. And I think the one that just a fortnight ago, or even less, demanded the arrest of Netanyahu and his primary war minister.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different court, which somehow has a little bit less sway. But yeah, it might
Well,
be
they're
good to distinguish what these bodies are. Maybe you can do that in the show notes.
yeah. Well, maybe the tide is turning. They're definitely feeling the pressure. I saw an interview with Netanyahu yesterday. He looked pretty upset and like frantic, you know. He said that's like saying, you know, Bush is responsible for 9/11, and we're all
Yeah,
like, yeah, exactly. He's responsible for the crimes he committed after 9/11. We'll leave the question of his, you know, involvement in the actual 9/11 um to the side for now, but yeah. And you know, that's a great analogy because did you have foreknowledge of 10/7, October 7, BB. So
I will say I was watching a YouTube video yesterday with John Mearsheimer. You know that guy, I'm sure, right?
of course, yeah.
And the topic of conversation was like the prognosis for where this all ends up. And it wasn't good, man. Like he tends to take a very dispassionate and arguably even apolitical view of things to the point where sometimes he even irritates me because he doesn't necessarily take a stand on the side of justice. He just tries to, view it analytically, which fair enough. He's good for that. But anyway, like, yeah, he just was saying like there's no chance of a two-state solution, no chance of a one-state solution. All that he envisioned happening was either complete removal of the Palestinians or continued apartheid. And that's crazy if all this is just gonna maintain the status quo. I don't know what else. I'm not an expert on the region, but I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have a thought on Mearsheimer because I recently listened to Garland Nixon talking about him. He says that Mearsheimer, while he's good on Israel Palestine and Russia Ukraine, he's trying to encourage people to pivot to China. So it's like, if that's the case, and I've heard him say things.
Actually, you just reminded me. Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway back when the Ukraine invasion started. That his focus, he was obsessed with
He
China.
was saying
Yeah,
that
I forgot
then
about
too.
that.
So
Yeah,
I've heard him say things like that, maybe not so explicitly, but I mean, if that's his focus, that's bad too. So we shouldn't be
sure. I guess I'm just
listening to
saying
him then.
his argument was pretty sound in terms of just playing out how this could go. It didn't
Right.
seem like, yeah.
Well, he calls himself a
So
realist,
yeah,
uh, rather than I don't know, a crusader. Like the
mm.
neoliberals are the crusaders who try to remake the world in their own image, but the political realist just tries to look at, well, he talks about great powers, right? The rivalries of great powers. So he analyzes everything from that perspective, which, as you say, is useful, but has its limitations as well. All right. Um, this is a great quote that you pulled.
So he asks, should we have patriarchs? Should we have popes? Should we have gods? And then it's in reference to the UN Security Council stuff because he's kind of maintaining this Marxist perspective where he really wants everything equal, equal, equal. So he just sees popes and patriarchs as manifestations of hierarchy. But
Hierarchies, exactly. That's what I was about to say.
but
Yeah.
at the same time, this felt a little bit jazzy in terms of if we're saying that this speech was very cohesive.
Yeah, this part might have been impromptu, extemporaneous, but
Yes.
it's nice. I mean, this series of rhetorical questions I thought was effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Inspired.
And yeah, so I don't know if this was before or after that previous quote, but as he continues to give background information about the United Nations, he says, um, the Security Council, uh, well, even before that, I guess the United Nations itself was set up in the absence of some 100, how many is that?
65.
165 countries at a ratio of 1 to 8. So only one out of every 9 countries in the world was actually present, but they created the charter. And one finds that the preamble of the charter differs from its articles. All those who attended the San Francisco conference in 1945 participated in creating the preamble, but they left the articles to experts, specialists, and interested countries, which were those countries that had established the Security Council and had united against Germany. So at that San Francisco conference, yes, one out of every 9 country in the world, I guess, was present and said, yes, we ratify the charter and the preamble, but then they left, and the elite group of countries said, well, we're going to establish these articles as well, so that, you know, in the end, we were left with a two-tiered system. The preamble says that all nations, small or large, are equal, but we, with the establishment of the articles and the Security Council, we have this two-tiered system in which all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Can I ask you, so acknowledging the disparities in the Security Council, is there much of an effort from non-Security Council members to improve the status quo, to challenge the structure of the UN? Do you know? And I mean, otherwise, why are these other states willing participants?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe that's something you should ask your friend Rich,
Our
but
friend, our resident artist. Let's give him some
yes,
props.
yes, our friend Rich. Um, I was surprised to learn that there are actually non-permanent members of the Security Council too. Did you see that? Like
Yeah, I knew
I
that.
think
I know
I
that.
think it's
Yeah,
like a rotating group. It's not,
it is right.
yeah, obviously it's non-permanent, right? So it's, what is that, just ceremonial? Like, okay, you guys come in here, you're gonna sign off on whatever we decide. We'll call you when it's your time to come, give us your stamp of approval.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's a rigged system. Like, of course, I don't think there's any way to dispute that. How can you justify it? It is supposed to be United Nations. Everyone, large or small, should be equal, but that's not the way it is. I mean, he
I
talks
mean, I
about
guess
how
I'm.
it's not just size, right? Like, Israel's not big in terms of geography, but we're talking military might. The possession of nuclear weapons is a big bargaining chip. Wealth, that's always something that gives more influence. So it's
Yeah, I mean,
certainly
I was going to
not.
say you could make
Mm-hmm.
an argument for some level of proportional representation, like based on population, but it's certainly not. That's not the primary modus operandi for the current layout. It's it's definitely, as you said, just down to stuff like weapons and wealth that kind of asserts your position.
Well, and as he points out more than once, I think it's they just use it as an instrument to justify whatever they want to do. When it suits them, they ignore the charter altogether, and they, when it can provide cover and justification for their actions, then they'll invoke it. You know,
And when they won't ratify it, they just create a coalition of the willing.
there you go. Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, frankly, it's like the Israelis. They say, "Oh, well, the Balfour declaration was totally legit. And, the United Nations granted us all this land. That's international law. You're going to ignore international law, but then when international bodies call them out, that's not fair. That's anti-Semitic. That doesn't apply to us. I mean, come on. It's disgusting.
Do you think, I mean, are you, I don't know if glad is the right word, but are you glad that this body exists?
Well,
Or is it just,
that is a very interesting question. I was discussing this in my recent episode of the Books Are Burning podcast. I looked at part 2 of Kant's To Perpetual Peace, and he, obviously this is before the establishment of the United Nations, but he argues for some kind of international body like that to maintain the peace. And that was the ostensible purpose of the League of Nations, which failed, after World War I to prevent World War II. And then that was Woodrow Wilson's thing, right? And then FDR and his wife come along with the United Nations after World War II to prevent World War III. And I said, well, there's certainly problems with it, but you could argue it's succeeded in that there hasn't been a third world war, but actually we might be in World War III right now and just not know it yet,
right?
And as our friend Muammar says, there have been many conflicts since World War II, and more people have died than were killed in World War II and probably World War One combined. But anyway, that reminded me of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we talked about, how they all sound nice in theory, but in practice, they don't apply equally. That was season 2, episode 13.
It's funny because I'm the main sponsor. I don't know if I told you this, but I'm the main sponsor of Model UN right now at my school.
Yeah.
And we're taking a group of students next week to Moscow. Yeah, and as a practice, it's positive, like we get all our students to give speeches and present things from that individual country's perspective, which is healthy, so they're forced to kind of get out of their own nationalist point of view, and so it's a positive practice. And obviously, like, I like the UN conceptually, or I like the idea of a UN.
Yeah,
Right? Dialogue is crucial.
a universal declaration which honors, individual and or national sovereignty while also emphasizing global principles, in theory, is a good thing. It's just that
Right.
the practice of it is completely hypocritical. And can you read the subtitle of this?
Yeah. It just says, adopted and proclaimed by the General Assembly of the UN on the 10th day of December, 1948.
Okay, so it was 3 years after the establishment of the UN. But yeah, I mean, the reason we considered that text in season 2 is because I had heard Roger Waters talking about it many times. He always mentions that, and so I wanted to look at those principles and see if I agreed with them all, because I had never read them in their entirety, and we did do that in that marathon episode, so people can go back and listen. I think we found ourselves to be in agreement with them, but with reservations because they're just not applied equally. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, like, it's not like I'm expecting like a perfect body. We are imperfect. Humans have lots of base instincts, so I'm not ever like expecting the UN to be, perfectly functional. I think what is frustrating though is when very basic structural elements are in place that don't even allow for a democratic process. So it's like there would be corruption regardless, and there would be challenges regardless. But at least if we could
But
have a setup that,
it's completely dysfunctional. I mean, I think he makes very powerful arguments to that effect.
yeah,
And I mean, and here's what we were alluding to before. 65 wars have broken out since the establishment of the United Nations and the Security Council. So this organization dedicated to peace, okay, you could say it's prevented World War III, but 65 wars. And this is in at the time of the speech, it was what, 48? Was it the 48th
I'm not sure.
session of the UN?
Okay.
Do the math. 2011 minus 1945. 48, right? Isn't that right?
No, no, it's more like 70 or something. I mean, 55 would be year 2000, then plus 9, so 64.
Oh, 64th, sorry. 2011 minus, what was it? 1945. Hmm?
Oh, not 2009, 2011, yeah?
Oh, 2000. No, 2009 is right. It is 2009. Yeah, 64. So it was in 64 years, you've had 65 wars. Congratulations. And more people have
Right.
died than died during World War II. So that's pretty
Yeah.
horrible. That's nothing to be proud of. Um, all right, then he highlights, which I think is inarguable, the principle of non-interference. The principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states is enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. No country, therefore, has the right to interfere in the affairs of any government, be it democratic or dictatorial, socialist or capitalist, reactionary or progressive. I mean, that's the concept of national sovereignty. Like, what right does one country have to interfere in the internal affairs of another? Like, what's that right
Yeah,
based
although
on?
let's make sure that we have this slide have a conversation with the previous one. So the previous one is saying, okay, all these wars happened. And this, now he's saying, I'm not saying there's any contradiction. I just want to make sure that we're allowing, again, there to be a dialogue between his different points of view. So not even different, but uh, subsequent points of view. So we'll later discuss about his view of civil war, but I guess I'm just asking, when he says that there's been 65 wars, is he arguing that there should have been more intervention from the UN to actively get in and stop wars? And if so, like, is a civil war considered one of these 65? Or is he only calling these wars between nation states? So,
Yeah, we don't get the complete
there's some,
we don't get
yeah,
the complete list. And that's one of the um I don't know, ironies of the United Nations. Like, how do they enforce their will if not through military action, Like, they're
right. I
an
mean, like right now,
organization, they're an organization for peace. How do you force peace on someone, right? This is one of the questions that Kant considers into perpetual peace. Like, how do you establish that? He in particular adopts this Hobbesian view that that humans are, savage by nature. Like it's the anti-Rousseau view, I guess you could say. So it's like people have to be forced to establish peace almost against their wills. But at the same time, he says, like, naturally, we eventually realize that's the best way to be, because otherwise we will constantly be at war and we can't trade with other peoples and we can't enjoy the fruits of civilization.
Yeah,
But
that all sounds right.
but when you have an organization like this, which is based on international law um and you know transnational norms, how do you enforce them? It's like that Chappelle joke, right? When he's Black Bush, he's like, if you don't like what I'm doing, then sanction me with your army. Oh, that's right. You ain't got no army.
Right.
Why
Well,
don't
and
you go?
here's the
Why
thing,
don't you go sell some medicine, bitches?
and just coming back to like to not give Gaddafi the pass here, he's speaking as a head of state, right? And he's saying like, "Don't fuck with my state," like, and especially he's saying this with possibly some predilection. Is that the right word? This is the part in the episode where Tom asks Mark about a vocabulary word.
Predilection.
So today's word is predilection. Predilection? That's like about
let's
possible
put it in the
something that might happen.
let's no a predilection is something that you have an affinity for, something that you like.
Oh, that's not what I want. I want to say premonition. Sorry, I want to say
Premonition.
premonition.
Okay.
So Gaddafi may have some premonition at this point for what's coming, and I do feel that like there's like a nervousness as he's saying stuff like this because he's fearful for America's next move.
Well,
Let me get to my main point though,
Yeah.
really quick. Sorry, my main point being that okay, you take it away because I forgot my main point.
Well, maybe you'll think of it as I babble on. But he alludes to this in the speech. He talks about how he gave up his program in which he was developing weapons of mass destruction, maybe including the fundamentals of a nuclear program, right? And interestingly or horrifyingly, this is what caused him to be overthrown. It's because he gave up all his weapons of mass destruction that they dared to invade him. That's why, people were saying, of course, North Korea is not going to give up their nuclear program because they saw what happened to Gaddafi.
Right.
You try to play nice with those psychopaths and they overthrow your government. So, yeah, right. You may be right. There is a kind of premonition. Maybe he's thinking, oh, shit, maybe I shouldn't have given up my weapons because now I'm like naked.
And your fantastic Babylon, I'm changing that, helped me remember what I wanted to say, which is just, if we realize just more cynically, and if it just comes down to Machiavellian power struggles, that he's speaking as a head of state, and he's like, well, don't enter my borders. In fact, he even argued that landmines should not be banned. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah,
I did.
Because they're a primarily defensive weapon.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to say, like, nation states are imaginary. We shouldn't forget, and within every nation state, we have different factions, different tribes. In some countries, it's more pronounced than in others. But, there were Bedouins living in Libya who felt oppressed, or so I read. I know that's the case in Morocco. So yeah, for him to then say, "Leave my kingdom alone," and civil wars are fine. I don't know. It's just like it's all again. It's just he's protecting his power. It doesn't necessarily make him benevolent to say this. Is my point.
Well, and he, as the title of this episode suggests, he kind of admits that in an interesting way that we'll get to. But let's move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is, I guess, one of his theses, or maybe it's an elaboration of the main thesis. There should be equality among member states, and the powers and mandates of the Security Council should be transferred to the General Assembly. That is basically the point of his speech, right? He says
Yes.
we should
Yes.
just
Right.
ignore the Security Council, which is really the Terror Council, and we should only focus on the General Assembly. All decisions should be made there, and all countries should vote equally.
Right.
And that's
And as I
it.
said,
And there's no
did give some
veto. There's no
allowance.
veto. No veto. Right? You
Right.
can't.
And with
Yeah.
the small caveat that they can be the ones to enforce the General Assembly's will. He did
The
grant
Security
that.
Council.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah, this relates to a question you asked earlier, like those non-permanent member states, and then all the participants. Like, what are they really doing? Why are they playing along? But he quite openly says it's kind of like how Hugo Chavez would make speeches on international stages. Remember, I think it was at the UN after Bush spoke. He gets up there and he says, "Ooh, it smells like sulfur. The devil was just
Oh
here."
yeah, that was a classic quote.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like he just says out loud what everyone knows to be true. It's like the bad student speaks up, and he's going to be punished later by the school marm. But he says we are like Speaker's Corner in London's Hyde Park. We just speak and nobody implements our decisions. And his speech that we're looking at today is a case in point, right?
Yeah.
He calls for all these things to be done, transfer the power of the Security Council to the General Assembly, investigate all this stuff. We'll get to that later. Did any of that happen? No.
And camera pans to the snickering delegates.
I didn't see that, but I take your word for it. So it's
Yeah.
it's like the old lady on her soapbox in Hyde Park, or wherever, any
Peace be
street
upon her.
corner. Yeah, just pontificating, and people walk by pitying her.
Her naivete.
Yeah. So yeah, we alluded to this as well. At one point he says colonization should be punished, and we've got an image here of the Italian colonization of Libya, and as you pointed out, Berlusconi had made some deal with Gaddafi and the Libyan government, and there were reparations paid. I certainly didn't know that.
He's got a gigantic figure that he quotes. He says Africa deserves 777 trillion in compensation from the countries that colonize it. I'm not saying he's off on that number, but it's just interesting. How do you get that number for like 500 years of history or whatever?
Of
we'll calculate it down to
stolen resources, and obviously slavery as well. But
that's a pretty compelling part of the speech. I just want to say, like,
oh, for
and then he's like, hell yeah, we're coming back to Europe. Hell yeah, we're immigrating to Europe to take back what's ours. And it just makes you think about the current landscape with refugees. And I was watching other videos where you see these boats, and of course it's disgusting and tragic what people have been reduced to. And then you get the the subsequent racism from the Europeans towards these refugees. But I like the way that Gaddafi framed it. He's like, we're climbing
Absolutely.
back on to seize what's ours, bitches. You
Yeah,
know, like,
we're coming to take back our shit. And but then he
give us our
says,
tea money.
you'll notice there are no Libyan immigrants to Italy. Why is that? Because they paid reparations. So,
Because Berlusconi paid me.
yeah. So we're controlling, and that that was known at the time that he was controlling the flow of
Yeah,
immigrants to
right.
Europe, and he, had strict borders and so on. And so all of that was destroyed. All of that infrastructure was destroyed by the foolish, reckless policies of the Obama administration.
You know that there are these guys who do these like adventure travel YouTube videos, right? Like they're the ones who choose to go to the most dangerous off the grid places. And I was watching a little piece of one today of a guy who recently went to Libya. Actually, so it's kind of cool. Like, fine, I supported his trek. And they just showed him the first thing he did. Like, they went to fill up his tank, and still today, to fill up a tank of gas is 80 cents because that's how much oil they have. It's
Wow.
crazy. Yeah. So the potential for wealth. That's the point. You know, it's nice climate, beaches, uh, Amazonians. You
Amazonians.
know,
You got my attention.
not quite, but yeah. I knew I had to throw that word in there. But yeah,
You know
there.
you know
And I
the
asked,
you know what Amazon means? The
no,
etymology of Amazon?
tell me.
Breastless.
Oh wow, interesting.
Meaning not mazon is breast. So that's why it was thought they were good archers, because they didn't have a tit. Um
Interesting.
I don't know if that was by
Listeners, make
nature.
sure you.
I don't know if that was by
Yeah,
nature, or it was lopped off at birth, actually, but
right.
that
Eunuch
was the
style.
idea. Yeah. All right. Carrying on. All right, this is great. I love this part. We're about to put the UN on trial, he says. And then he just has this catalog of the most horrific UN military operations: Korea, the Suez Canal, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, Somalia, Yugoslavia, and the mother of all evils, Iraq.
Well, you called them UN operations. Do you mean more like UN omissions, or is it about the fact that they let these things happen, or that they?
Yeah, well, Korea was, I think, specifically a UN police action. So maybe some of the others are different, right? Like, yeah, Vietnam was allowed by the UN to happen.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying it's one of these things where you don't know. He kind of is speaking out of both sides of his mouth here. Like, on one hand, leave states alone, and on the other hand, don't let war happen. So I don't know. He could be challenged on some of this stuff.
Yeah, but if his vision of the General Assembly um, were implemented, then
Right.
all the countries would vote on it, and
They would vote
they
on, and then what? And then what?
they would have decided, likely, no, we're not going to have a war, and then the Security Council would be um, tasked with enforcing it. But then, yeah, again, there's the question of enforcement. But if what's the point of
And how do
having
you
an
enforce without going into a state and
exactly?
taking away its quote unquote sovereignty?
Yeah, well, there are other maybe there are other options besides military force. Maybe there are economic sanctions, or you know, um,
Yeah, but they're
making a particular country a pariah state, as seems to be happening, like ensuring that leaders of the pariah state get arrested and punished when they travel abroad. So
yeah, a
there's
lot of this
some
feels
legal,
fanciful, but
well, but there are some legal mechanisms in place if they could only be used. I mean, what do you think? There's no hope for it. It's always down to the use of force.
no, not at all. But I just think he's trying a little bit to paint a black or white picture where we have to admit that global conflict is tricky and will continue to be tricky. And I think it's right to attack, aspects of the UN, but then to expect the UN to prevent war, that seems absurd. Like
Hmm.
it's like the
Then what does it exist for? I mean, wasn't that the purpose? Isn't he calling out the failures of this institution? Like using the institution's own reasons and justifications for being to show that it's not doing a very good job.
I'm just saying, but he was also responsible for assaults and attacks within his own country against opposition. So, you know, life, this is what happens when people seek power. I'm not giving him a
Mm-hmm.
pass, you know.
Right.
I'm not saying he's wrong, but he's complicit. He's a
Okay.
pirate.
Okay. Well, as he says. And then, okay, just a side note to that mother of all evils. He focuses on Abu Ghraib, and for good reason. But I thought his description of it was interesting, and I didn't include a picture of that because we've all seen it. It's horrifying. It's despicable. It was a war crime, and the war criminals that promoted it, Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, all of those pieces of shit are still at large. Rumsfeld's dead, I think, but you know, Bush and
Is
Cheney,
he?
I think so.
Yeah, I think you're
Bush
right.
and
I think
Cheney
you're right.
are still walk the earth, with impunity. But his description was it was sodomy, and it was an unprecedented sin never before committed by past aggressors or invaders. That's a bit hyperbolic, I think. I know that
Yeah,
ancient Near Eastern um, victorious armies in the ancient Near East sodomized their, the people they conquered. Like that's there is some historical precedent for that, but certainly what happened there was like new. Well, I guess similar things happened during World War II, and Japanese and German and probably American camps.
yeah. I'm not super
Well, I don't know.
interested, but I mean,
I don't know if there was
but
sodomy in
it's
those.
obvious that yeah, I agree. I had the same reaction. Like intense brutality is not something new for the human species.
Yeah, but
We've done some pretty freaky shit.
I'm glad he highlighted that, which
Yeah.
even our son Obama admitted later. Remember, we tortured some folks. Remember that?
No,
We tortured some folks.
that's a great line. Oh my god, I love the I love the juxtaposition of the word "folks" with
Yeah,
torture.
you know, just happened. And then, okay, so then talking about the internal affairs of other countries, he says of the Taliban in Afghanistan, he's like, hey, if they want to have their religious, you know, organization,
Theocracy.
yeah, theocracy, let them do it. That's their business. He says, think of the Vatican, which is an interesting parallel. I had never made that connection. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I want you to explain your take because I didn't really know what to make of that. I mean, it just seemed like
Well, I mean, it's a religious state. It's allowed to exist. Like if the Vatican has the right to exist, why can't the Taliban exist in Afghanistan?
I like that they're both three-syllable words that rhyme, but kind of rhyme,
Vatican,
or half rhyme.
Taliban. Yeah.
Yeah, Caliban. Um, but I don't know. It's not a pure analogy to me.
Okay. Well, that's just a side note.
Yeah,
But this part, I think we will agree, is very important. He says, "What was the reasons, or what was the reason for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? If I truly wanted to deceive my American and British friends, I would encourage them to send more troops, and I would encourage them to persist in this bloodbath. But they will never succeed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Look what happened to them in Iraq, which is a desert. It is even worse in mountainous Afghanistan." So, speaking of prescience, right?
yeah.
All right, carry
I
on.
was
This
thinking
is.
too about Gaza. I mean,
Mm,
I'm for some reason I'm less optimistic. I want to be careful of my words here, like it's not necessarily like I'm cheering for anyone. I'm cheering for humans. But some people are arguing that Israel is actually like losing, that Palestine has strengthened in the north of Gaza now. But I would like to believe that's the case to some extent, but I just can't help but worry about just the lack of food and water that's coming in. So I don't even know how the resistance army can kind of sustain its efforts. But I don't know. We don't need to get into that.
well, we'll touch upon it at the end, but I'll let you read this slide.
Okay. Well, this is building on what we were saying earlier about Gaddafi saying to leave the sovereign states alone, and here he's kind of giving his blessings for civil wars, which I thought was kind of interesting. Leave Afghanistan to the Afghans, leave Iraq to the Iraqis. If they want to fight each other, they are free to do so. America had its civil war and no one interfered in it. Is that true? You can tell me. There were civil wars in Spain, China, and countries all over the world. And we know that Spain definitely didn't occur without foreign influence.
Right, right.
No place on earth has been free of civil wars. I'll
Hmm.
let you
Well,
jump on that.
yeah, that's a good point. Spain, in particular, there was a lot of outside interference, I guess you could say. Yeah, and a lot of American leftists, and not only American, I mean, Orwell went to Spain to fight
Yeah.
on behalf of the Republican forces. So I guess you could say that's different because he volunteered and joined, you know, one of those internally organized armies or military forces. It wasn't like he was part of a British um
Right.
contingent. Well, I mean, maybe he went with a group of Brits, but you know what I'm saying. It's not like a British invasion. It's like some British dudes that went and fought on behalf of the Spanish Republicans, which I don't know. That's slightly different, but how different is it? Like when they're U.S. soldiers fighting in Ukraine, for example, or on the side of Israel, like that's a kind of interference. I mean,
Of
Israel
course.
Israel Palestine is kind of a, you can't really call it a war because they're not two I don't know. It's an occupied population being attacked by one of the most powerful militaries in the world, backed by the most powerful military in the world. So certainly asymmetrical. I don't know if it qualifies as a civil war, but yeah, I mean, I guess the question is it possible for there not to be interference of some sort? Maybe not. And this is,
Yeah, and just as an internationalist, I will repeatedly come back to this idea of like protesting against the idea of nation states being some kind of like sanctimonious border that we should defer to, because a lot of people just are born into a place that, oh, this is my ruler, but they don't necessarily like want this particular ruler or
yeah,
border.
yeah.
So just a bunch of fiefdoms, really.
I think the principle of national sovereignty is important, especially for developing nations, third world nations, so called, because that's the only way they can maintain some independence from the, you know, global hegemon or the multipolar hegemons.
But isn't that where some of the most brutal atrocities have taken place? I mean, in terms of like tribal civil wars, and I can't think of the countries off the top of my head. I could say some random places, and I'd probably be right with one of them. But the Tutsis were fighting against who, for example? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
The Hutu and the Tutsi. Sorry.
yeah,
Um. So that was in Rwanda. Yeah, Rwandan genocide because of the Rwandan civil war. Yeah, I mean, and there are other instances of that type of tribal warfare. So again, my point is that that nation state doesn't necessarily indicate an organic nation, right? It could be somewhere that Europe just demarcated and said, okay, this is going to be a country, when it does not really like work as a country.
yeah. Well, again, this is something that Kant talks about, and he didn't live to see it, but like the Sykes-Picot agreement, that arbitrarily created all these countries in the Middle East. Like, he foresaw that. He said, of course, when you do that, it's going to lead to conflict and war. So you shouldn't do that in the first place. So yeah. All right, and this is probably my favorite part. He calls upon Mr. Ali Trekkie, who some UN official. I grabbed his picture here, never heard of him, and I'm sure he didn't act on this, but he said Mr. Ali Trekkie should open an assassination file. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's find out what happened to Lumumba, uh, Hammarskjöld, JFK, MLK, and then three Arab guys. I don't know, Khalil Wazir, Abu Iyad, Kamal Nasser. I'd like to research
He shouted
these
out one
three.
poet. That was kind of cool. Did
Mm-hmm.
you notice that?
I did, yeah.
That was Kamal Nasser. Yeah,
Do you know
just
him?
since he's one of our brothers. No, but I always appreciate a poet getting shouted out on the world stage.
Well, I mean,
Brother in pen.
I think he, I think he suspects what many of us suspect, that there's more to these stories than has been officially admitted. I mean, it's obvious. We know that Lumumba was overthrown, killed, murdered by the Dulles brothers. Hammarskjöld, I don't know as much about him. He was a UN maybe Secretary General, and he died in a mysterious plane crash. Very suspicious, because he was probably trying to institute some of these reforms that Gaddafi highlights. JFK, well, we all know about that. Speaking of the Dulles brothers, MLK, and then again, I'd like to learn more about these three Arabs that were assassinated. So, yes, Mr. Trekkie, I know you didn't do it, but someone should definitely open an assassination file. And as a footnote to the JFK assassination, this is crazy. I never heard this before. He says Jack Ruby, an Israeli. Um, I never heard that. Did I spell Israeli correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Jack Ruby, an Israeli. I mean, of course, he's an American Jew, but was he a dual citizen? I had never heard that. But he describes him as an Israeli. Jack Ruby, an Israeli, killed Lee Harvey Oswald, who killed Kennedy. Why did this Israeli kill Kennedy's killer? Then Jack Ruby, the killer of Kennedy, died in mysterious circumstances before he could be tried. And they were very mysterious. We must open the files. The whole world knows that Kennedy wanted to investigate the Israeli Dimona nuclear reactor. This is something I learned about recently. I think that is, it's definitely true. Like there's no doubt about that. The question is, was Israel somehow involved in the JFK assassination? Would it surprise anyone to learn that they were? Not me. Only a few years later, they fired on the USS Liberty, you know? So could they have been part of a joint operation with the Dulles crew in the CIA and whoever else was involved? That wouldn't surprise me. But to hear Jack Ruby described as an Israeli, that was surprising. I've never heard that. But maybe he was. Maybe he had Mossad connections or was a dual citizen. I don't know. I hadn't heard that. But that would be interesting to investigate. It certainly should be followed up. Look at that picture.
Open the files, bitch.
Look at that picture. I don't know if you've ever seen like the live footage. This was broadcast on national TV. Like the killer of Kennedy was killed on live TV. I mean, it was it. If you ever watch that video, it looks like a teleplay. It's so staged, you know. He just walks in, he says Oswald, and he shoots him. Look at this guy standing by, almost like here he is.
Yeah, wow.
Here he is, Jack. It's like
It's a tableau.
it's like it's really unbelievable that happened, you know. So here is the comment about pirates, which I don't know. I just thought this was an interesting admission after all the criticism of other nations. He kind of self-reflects. He says, "We talk about piracy in Somalia. Somalis are not pirates. We are the pirates. We went there and usurped their economic zones, their fish and their wealth. Libya, India, Japan, and America, any country in the world, we are all pirates. We all entered the territorial waters and economic zones of Somalia and stole." What did you make of that?
Similar to you, I mean, it just made me pity these Somalis who, like in many instances, we make the weakest resistors the ultimate villains in the world, and it's just so tragic when you pick on the weak like this, and you dare to describe them as these kind of savage historical pirates, you know, which conjures up all kinds of fearful thoughts in suburban homes. when yeah, I mean, this is one of the poorest countries in the world, and as you said, this is their sustenance. So yeah, it just made me sad.
I just like that notion. We are all pirates. It's
Yeah,
a really interesting admission to make, and
makes me think of the streets. Mikey Skinner saying we are all heroes, but it's a bit different.
it's a catchy
But we can be
title.
heroes. Yeah, yeah,
A catchy title for sure. Um, well, okay, I know what I was gonna say. Like, yeah, you designate someone or some group to be pirates or, of course, terrorists. So
exactly. Yeah.
one of the things I love about this speech is how he throws that word back into the face of the faces of the superpowers. Right? Says actually, you're the terrorists. You're the terror council.
Right,
So
right.
that has a very salutary effect, in my opinion. All right, and then this is particularly relevant and maybe prescient as well. I'll let you read it.
Well, you introduced Gaddafi's Green Book early on as kind of his statement, his whole philosophy encompassed in that pamphlet, hashtag Ken. Uh, but he also produced the White Book, which speaks specifically to Israel and Palestine, and it's subtitled or titled Isra'tine. He says, a proposal by Muammar al-Gaddafi, spelled with a Q as your father likes it.
Mm.
The two-state solution is not possible. The generation of Sharon and Arafat is over. Look at Palestinian and Israeli youth. They both want peace and democracy. The solution is Isra'tine.
Did you know
Brought
that
to you by
Pfizer?
MGM Studios
Did you know that?
or Pfizer.
Did you know there was a flag? I just googled Israeltine images, and this flag came up. It's for those not watching. It's basically a combination of the Palestinian and Israeli flags. You've got the
I have a
red,
feeling that
black, and
Arabs would
green.
not be thrilled with the Star of David, though, on
Well,
their flag.
I mean,
Or at least it would have to be paired with a
I
crescent.
wonder if this is like, is this Gaddafi's design? The fact that he's thinking about it is really. I mean, I didn't know this. I didn't know he had proposed this. Did anyone take it seriously? Why was it ignored? Why didn't people, try to, uh, involve
Listen to
him
the prophet,
somehow?
man.
Yeah, the mad dog of the Middle East. Why not involve him?
I do like the reference to the youth, though. I mean, it's often the case, but yeah, I mean, think right. It's the old men who send everyone to war.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he
It's a preview for Bob Dylan coming up soon, baby.
mm,
All you masters of war.
well, it's not that one, but okay. Maybe we'll have occasion
Okay.
to discuss that. Um, so I guess you could say he closes with this thought. I mean, there are some more ramblings, but basically he ends on this note. He says Arabs have no hostility or animosity towards Israel, and of course, it's a good note.
That's a joke.
It's a good note for us to end on
It's a
as
joke,
well.
though.
Um, well, let him explain. He says we are cousins and
All
of the
right.
same race. You, meaning you Western powers, you are the ones who brought the Holocaust upon the Jews. You, not we, are the ones who burned them. We gave them refuge. We gave them safe haven during the Roman era and the Arab reign in Andalusia and during the rule of Hitler. We are note, that should be not, enemies of the Jews, and one day the Jews will need the Arabs. I think when he says no hostility or animosity towards Israel, he means the Jewish people. So maybe he should have been more careful with his phrasing there. But
Yeah, that's not my experience.
I like how he's calling out the true perpetrators of the Holocaust. Why are the Palestinians paying for the crimes of Europe? You know, that's
For
what
sure.
many people have asked. All right, and so tell us about the next text, unless you've got something else.
The only thing I've got is another engagement which I need to run off to soon.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the next text. This is a collaborative request, I would say. So it's bringing together my good friends, yourself and Joe, who I know both of you are Dylan fans, and I can even add a third important figure in my life, which would be my father. So I'm using my weekly choice to kind of breach the gap between us in our musical tastes and delve a little bit deeper into an absence in my musical knowledge. So I have a fairly surface experience with Dylan. I'm not completely new listener to his, but I've never
Like me, I'm
I
a
think
noob.
Yeah, exactly. But no, kind of like how we're going to Bowie. Like I have some exposure to Dylan, but I've never given like a passionate listening to an album before.
Mm-hmm.
So I have ordered this vinyl, and that's a picture of the vinyl that's currently on its way from Ufa, of all places. And I'll be putting that on my vinyl player for the next couple weeks as I try to add something to the conversation that you and hopefully Joe will have in one of our first pods that will feature a guest contributor. So let's see how that goes.
This is a Russian
All you
bootleg or
Dylan
what?
fans,
This is a Russian
it's not a
bootleg?
bootleg, but it is a Russian. It's an actual. I'm pretty sure it's legit. I feel like that label might have been thrown on, but I think it's definitely not a bootleg. I'm paying for the original quality, and I expect the original quality. So we're going to be listening, to Love and Theft. Mark, maybe you can say something about why that album. How do you think we came upon that album rather than another one?
Well, I mean, it's in my top 10 list of Dylan albums that you shared with Joe, and it was Joe's number one, I think, wasn't it?
Okay.
It was his number one. So we
Okay.
both think highly of it. It's one of my favorites. It's a late masterpiece, or as I described it in a recent post, an autumnal masterpiece. So yeah, I look forward to listening to that again and discussing it with a true Dylan expert.
That being yourself, of course.
Yeah, what's that?
That being yourself.
No, I defer to the master. Um,
You mean Guy Bethel? Sorry, I'm just keep fucking with you. Maybe we can get Dad on there too. At least we can get him to do a contribution, some
yeah,
sort.
yeah, that would be interesting. No, actually, on I don't think it was Joe's recommendation, but his co-host Gareth's recommendation. I listened to Street Legal, which I think it was Gareth's number one. Um, wow. Okay, I have a response to that, which I might record for one of my other podcasts, Guitar and Pen, but we'll see if I have time to do that before the next episode of Texting. And as
Good
always,
deal.
be sure to subscribe to the newsletters. I'm at Mark Will Write, WRITE.substack.com. My co-host is at tomegb.substack.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's at Mark Will Write, WRITE. This has been Season 3, Episode 11. we are all pirates. And the text we considered was Gaddafi's speech before the UN in 2009. Until next time, Textual Deviants, farewell.